All right. I didn't have anything planned, but I'll take the chance to talk a little bit about Timeline because I happen to have been assigned as the coordinator for this week for the capacity planning issues, and so I'm trying to figure out how to get Timeline to adjust to changes. So, for example, one of the alerts that I was looking at was this one for potential saturation for PG Bouncer client connections, which forecast that we will reach 80% somewhat soon in August or September. But this doesn't seem to match what the current behavior is. So it seems that we had a base level that was around 20%, and then our lowest level is now like 25%, but it seems pretty stable at that point. But I guess Timeline likes to be pessimistic about stuff and say, well, if we had that bump, then I'll project that we'll continue to have small bumps, and then things will get out of control. But I don't see a reason to believe that. So I was talking with Bob, and he talked about this file, which I think I already have open, which are the forecast parameters where you can add change points and see how that affects. I'm still trying to figure out like if that makes Timeline more or less biased towards changes if you add a checkpoint. It's from I was trying to generate things locally, but they seem really slow. But yeah, I'm still trying to figure out.
If you remove all the components in the markdown file, it goes a bit faster. Did you do that?
Yes. So let me show you what I have so far. So I changed the Petroni thing to have only the component that I want.
Yeah, remove the ops one on the bottom as well. So, yes, there you see.
This one? No.
No, on the you've got the. Wait a second. So that's the imports. Component dict is empty there. On the bottom you've got operation rates with some
Yes.
stars. Remove that or comment it out.
Okay.
Or remove it entirely. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll remove it for now.
And then, how are you running?
Okay, so I tried the thing that you said, which was to run. So I have downloaded the data. So I have now this data folder, which is a couple of gigs. And then I should run now. So I was doing this. And the thing that I was looking is that there is in the documentation this this flag that you said timeline only cache. I was playing around with it, and it doesn't seem to. I don't know if it's checking if the data folder is there, because it seems that regardless of whether I put that flag or not, it is using the cache. But let's run it like this. Which yeah, now with the cache downloaded, it is really fast. Maybe not.
What's breaking?
Let me. The above section was the direct cause.
Maybe open that file, but I think maybe we've broken something in the markdown thing.
So I think before I took that out, I think it worked. I mean, let me just, because it was working before. Obviously, when you demo something, it's bound to break. Okay. So it wasn't that. Did I make any other changes? Wait, let me just diff here. So yeah, just deleting a bunch of stuff from book Petroni. And then I was debugging this, but that doesn't matter. I don't know if I should have the SSH tunnel up, even if I'm using the cache.
Normally you shouldn't.
I'll just oh wait, that's probably my YubiKey or something. Okay, that wasn't it. Let me go back. Yeah, I'm not sure what did I break. Let me see live debugging here. Or maybe we can look at that file that exists, this one. Oh, this is still not great. Timeline only cache is set, but try to fetch from Thanos.
Yeah, so that's what did it try to fetch from Thanos and why?
So it's in query log with range, which was called by prompt query, which was called by saturation forecasting.
So if you I think it's trying to load today. Does it work if you enable the tunnel?
Okay, let's try that. So that's what I was trying to figure out. So
It shouldn't, but
yeah, shouldn't matter. But something's wrong with my. So I had to. So this is I was
there's
as I yep.
an environment variable that you can set for the now time and maybe set that to yesterday. Maybe check the readme. There should be
Okay, let's see.
variable there.
Time. Let me check the F example.
Yeah, and go to saturation forecasting .py. I think. Yeah, and then there search for now. Oh wait, what was that file called again? Sorry, it's called just forecasting.py.
Timeline now time we have.
Yes.
Okay, that's it. And it's at year date, year month date. if it's the same thing. Yeah, timeline of the cache. It just
What does timeline.log say?
timeline.log.
Yeah, there's a file in the root of the directory, and maybe, yeah. .log, go to the end, maybe. So there are cache hits for.
And then query range with cache missed.
Yes, and which range is it doing? The 23rd. Wait a second. 9. Did you change the? Yeah, are the types the same of the queries?
The types.
Yeah, can you show me the diff of the markdown file again?
Yep.
It's all good.
Let us change.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, and I would like to set up a tunnel because I usually run it with a tunnel, but something. So I've had a lot of trouble setting up this, and one reason is that apparently and this was something that I think I've encountered a couple of times, but when I migrated from my Intel MacBook to this M1 MacBook, I did the migration assistant, and that copied a bunch of homebrew installation stuff that was x86. And I had to just remove all of that. And I think a couple of things from my broke, including my SSH tunnel is not working now. But I'll have to figure out that offline. But I guess I'll just take the chance to ask Bob, because you mentioned that adding a trend change point should help. Can you speak more about what the logic is behind that?
Yeah, so a change point. By default, Tamland or like Prophet does this, adds about, I think it's 25 change points in the first 80% of data. So that means that this change that we see at the end of yeah, the end of June-ish,
Yep.
won't have a change point yet, which is why it says, okay, it's trending upwards now. If you add a change point there, then it changes the trend line, and the mean will change towards, like, because then that's where there's a trick in timeline so you can see them. Then like that's where the mean line changes. So every time you see this blue line, every time it changes direction, that's where a change point is. So what you're saying now, by adding a trend change point, you're allowed to change direction here.
Okay.
So with that, I'm hoping that what I'm expecting that change to do is it'll make the growth less steep on the end, but it will make the confidence wider. So I don't think it's going to remove, or maybe it will, because yeah, the confidence range is not that wide, all in all. So yeah, that's the thing to play with, and it's handy if you can run it fast, because normally when you do the single component, it takes like 2-3 seconds. So then I just have like a browser open and I refresh, change the parameter, refresh, and it kind of like that. It's not such a horrible feedback loop.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. I'll keep playing with that. I know that wasn't too informative, but yeah, I just at least take this home. If you're going from an Intel MacBook to an M1, don't do the migration thing. It brings problems.
Yeah, I had so much trouble with that as well. Like old binaries still lying around with the wrong architecture. The path in Homebrew changed. Yeah, disaster.
Yeah, I also had to play with the paths. Yeah.
It doesn't help, does it, that macOS went, oh, but we've got Rosetta and that'll fix everything. So you end up in a state where it's not clean, works or doesn't work. It's a odd behavior and things that don't work in certain architectures. Like, no, that one thing isn't in the instruction set, but we're not going to tell you that up front.
The Rosetta thing between when they went to x86 was pretty good, I thought. Anyway, I had another question. I just came out of a call with some people that work on the CAS service. Apparently, that talks to Redis persistent. I didn't know that.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Have we thought about that when we're talking about Redis cluster? Or we think like, yeah, is that already brought up in discussions? Or do we need to still?
I don't know if it's been discussed in the context of cluster specifically, but there's been discussions around having a dedicated Redis for CAS. I can try and pull up some old issues where it's been discussed.
No, it's okay. I was just asking if we knew about it. I'll find the issues and mention it. But there's a Workhorse also does this. I think that's probably something that we need to keep in the same instance as Rails, because it's something with uploaders. I don't know. Things that we need to look into. I was surprised to learn that CAS tags to Redis persistent.
Me too. When I learned about it, yeah,
yes,
I don't think it's
I knew
very
that
well
a long time
known.
ago. Yeah, fell out of my head too. I remember us talking about whether it needed a dedicated Redis instance and deciding against it because it was just too small a workload at the time.
And too much work to set up a Redis instance.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's not touching the same data that Rails does. It's just a distinct, separate subset of data.
As far as I know, yes.
I think so, but I mean, my knowledge is very, very out of date by now.
But Workhorse, you said, also talks with Redis persistent?
Yeah, but that's for Rails and Workhorse to be able to talk to each other.
Oh, okay.
Bob, can you put a message somewhere, I don't know, just in like Scalability Lounge and tag Sylvester to make sure that he's
I was
aware?
going to.
Perfect. I'm sure you were. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
I've also dropped a link to the epic that I created 6 months ago when this came up the last time around.
Excellent. I'll cross-link that.
Any other topics today?
I can talk about the AI architecture thing that I've been working on the past few hours, if that's interesting to everybody.
I would like an update. Love an update on that.
So, okay, let me share my screen. I don't have anything pretty to present, so you can all look at my editor and see what I was typing. So, the idea is to have the AI gateway that GitLab instances, including GitLab.com SaaS, dedicated, self-managed can talk to. Not a single one, but multiple ones, depending on the deployment. In the beginning, I suspect it's going to be GitLab SaaS and self-managed instances talking to a single AI gateway. And there's going to be my suggestion that they talk gRPC to that gateway. The reason I would suggest gRPC is because we don't need to do versioning. That means we can keep the API pretty stable. We can add stuff without breaking old clients. We can't remove stuff, but we can choose to ignore it. Actually, we can remove it as long as we keep the numbers the same, but you know. And I've started writing that up. The idea is that the GitLab instances provide all the data that they can to the AI gateway, and the AI gateway decides what to do with it, how to generate whatever response it needs. So that would mean that we create a separate gRPC service for each of the things that we want it to do. And here I've added an example for the code suggestion service. Yeah, that's about it. For code suggestions, we also have a component in Visual Studio and the Web IDE. The idea would be that those things talk to their respective GitLab instances that then forward the request to the AI gateway. Right now, this communication happens in just regular REST. I'm wondering if that could also, in a future iteration, become something that does protobuf. So if we do that, then we would be able to forward things that the GitLab instance that it's talking to doesn't know. Imagine a situation where we've got a developer that has the most recent version of the code extension, but they're working at a bank that has a GitLab version that is 2 versions behind. Their self-managed instance is 2 versions behind. They could still use newer features that we've introduced to the VS Code extension if the GitLab instance that sits in between the VS Code extension and the AI gateway just transparently passes on whatever it gets, which I think we could do with protobuf 3. That's that out of the way. I mentioned that I would recommend building a service for each feature that we build. So we have a code suggestion feature, we could have a chat feature, we could have a summarize issue feature. The reason I do that is that because that would allow us to change and improve the way we talk to AI providers for everyone at the same time. So because the AI gateway is something that is owned by us and hosted by us, it is deployed to much more frequently than the 1 update a month that we otherwise do for self-managed users, and not all of them update every month. So that means that we can iterate faster and people can see improvements faster regardless of what version of GitLab that they're running. What else did I want to call out? Yeah, currently we've built some features in GitLab inside the monolith. So what these features do is just call out to OpenAI with like regular requests and provide AI things. The idea is that they are using our keys for that. So this doesn't work for self-managed. That's why we need them to go through the AI gateway. But because these features are already built with that are already built inside the monolith and directly tied to the provider, I'm suggesting to build like a proxy in gRPC to account for them, but I am recommending to migrate them over to feature-specific RPC when we can. That's about how far I got. Any thoughts?
So currently, I think the current situation is a bit messy, right? Because there's some features that are built in the monolith that call out to OpenAI or to Google Vertex. But I think code suggestion is different in that it speaks directly to Vertex and Google, right?
Yes, but it's also different because the clients that use code suggestions reach out immediately to the model gateway, which is going to become the AI gateway, and it doesn't have any information on the GitLab instance. So we want to start routing requests from Visual Studio through gitlab.com. If you are using gitlab.com, if you're working on a project that is hosted on gitlab.com, you're going to proxy the request to gitlab.com. GitLab.com is going to add any information that it has about your project or whatever before forwarding it to the AI gateway. The AI gateway is then going to route it to Google Vertex. Like build a prompt and route it to Google Vertex. But indeed, it's a bit messy right now because that's the only feature that, well, it doesn't work like we want it to work yet. But it's the only one that is using the gateway, and the rest is just doing their own thing.
And what is the improvement that we're looking for by going to GitLab? Like, couldn't you argue that not involving the GitLab instance makes it more flexible because you're not tied to the Rails version at all?
So that was my first idea as well.
I can maybe inject some product context there.
Yes, please.
If you look at one of the hottest kind of competitors in the market from SourceGraph, they're doing really, really well in performance with their code suggestion because they're able to take this SourceGraph and use it as a vector embedding to improve the results that get back, because the OpenAI model or whatever it is suddenly has a lot of context about what your repository is, the file structure, and all of those sorts of things. So in order to not be left out of that market, I think we're putting a gateway in place, right? So if we're on that round trip, when we do think about that information, gathering it and maybe turning it into vector embeddings, to make that easy for stage teams or the AI enablement team to do. If we go straight to model, we can't inject that additional information into the prompts.
That's a discussion that we're going to have in the future as well. Like, where are the embeddings going to live? Because we don't do any embeddings now. We've built some database tables for it in a separate database. But I would hope that we could do this inside I haven't written a lot about this yet because I don't know a lot about it, but I was hoping that we could also do this in the AI gateway, because then we've taken a database dependency and out of the critical path for GitLab.com. So then we have this experimental embeddings database that may or may not be hosted on Cloud SQL. And if it becomes unavailable, GitLab doesn't boot, which is, annoying.
Undesirable.
Yeah. But I don't know enough about this yet to really see if that will work properly. The idea of going through GitLab instance for code suggestions as well, to enrich what we send off to the model, like without using embeddings or anything, to enrich it with context information. For example, we could add stuff like, we are building this file is going to contribute to this issue that's being worked on. And information about the issue could then help improve the code suggestions, perhaps, maybe.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I guess that would make it a more integrated feature. Like the current code suggestion doesn't involve GitLab much at all, right? It's basically just a check that does this user want third party or not models. But yeah, no, that makes sense.
They don't have a choice anymore. Google Vertex is not considered third party anymore.
Yeah, and further down the line in terms of like opportunity cost, the unique value I guess we're bringing in this space is the data we have and the insight we have as on the GitLab platform, right, whether .com or self-hosted. And if we're not injecting that in somehow, pick an LLM, you should get similar results that aren't, a USP for us.
The main concern that I still need to address somehow in the document is latency that it's added by the GitLab instance, because the model gateway that we were using before is super lightweight and all the latency is added from talking to the model. And we need to look into, like, the model gateway hop is very fast. That's not really what I'm worried about, but I suspect that the GitLab.com or GitLab instance hop is going to be more expensive. And it's not something we always control if we don't control the instance.
Is that an argument in the other direction then, in that Alejandro's question about, like, why don't we go straight to suggestions? In that,
yes, the initial idea that I discussed with Andrew was not thinking enough about self-managed installations and so on, but was the design where the VS Code extension keeps talking directly to the model gateway, and the model gateway requests information from GitLab.com to enrich the prompts that it sends to Vertex.
because then it has the context to ask for the data that it needs, right?
Yes, and then we could build caching in between and I don't know what, but yeah.
Okay. What stage is this at, Bob? Is, like, in terms of the designs that you shared with us, is this like you putting some ideas down, or is this been done in collaboration with, like, the AI development teams?
It's kind of like the zeroth iteration. I've talked about this with Stan and with Andras from the I don't know. There's 2 AI teams, and he's from one of them that works on the model gateway.
Good. Okay.
So it's not just me, but it's not enough people yet. I'm going to work with this on this with Matthias, Andras at first, and then get some eyes from Stan as well. And then after that, I think everybody can contribute. I deliberately kept them, like, didn't cross-link the merge request everywhere yet, because it was a bit of a hot topic and I wanted to be able to type stuff first.
Thinking about kind of what you showed this morning, Igor, in having to switch some hard-coded stuff in the extension to get, the demos working and things like that. Have we considered how we're going to approach the versioning in a way that's not going to kind of cause multi-version incompatibility at the extension IDE layer, but also allow customers to...
I've mentioned this in the doc a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be super cool if the communication between the IDE and whatever GitLab instance is also gRPC, because that makes it easy to not do versioning. Like, if the thing sends information that their GitLab instance understand, great, you'll get better results. If it doesn't, then that's too bad. We'll work with what we do know. And the cool thing, I think, would be is that in theory with protobuf v3, the GitLab instance doesn't need to know about everything that it receives. Like, if we keep if we reuse the same protobuf specification across the tree, we can have the editor extension call out with everything it knows to GitLab. GitLab can add stuff, but it doesn't need to open up what it reads from the IDE. So that means that if the messages are well-formed protobuf things, the AI gateway will just get them, even if the GitLab instance in between doesn't know about them.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's the worst case scenario, right? Is you have a self-managed customer where the extension accidentally updates and then suddenly code suggestions doesn't
I
work.
think we need to assume that these things are never going to match, because there's people like me who never update anything on their laptop until somebody threatens to restart it for them. And there's people who see an update and then immediately click the button.
Yeah, I think the protocol will have to maintain a pretty wide window of backwards compatibility. I don't think there's really a way around that.
No, and I think that using protobuf for that is a good idea, because the only thing that we need to do is never remove a field.
Yeah, I mean, we can also create like endpoint v2, endpoint v3, right? The gRPC method name is something that we can change so that we don't end up with like one huge switch
If we need a
statement.
clean cut.
Yeah.
If we need a clean cut, but I think for this kind of work, where we're basically just gathering information and then massaging it into a way to present it to whatever, like in this case, Google Vertex. It's just additional, right? Like if we have a client that didn't provide any open files, then we don't provide it upstream, and we'll get a less accurate or less useful response.
I don't know if I'm appreciating or underestimating the abilities, the capacities of IDE's extension, but I would just double check if, like, because I know there's VS Code, but there's also JetBrains and other like that. Just double check that all of them will allow you to add gRPC. I don't know if they just have.
Yeah, the first
HTTP request.
iteration doesn't do that. I think we could get the same thing done with just JSON, but then we need to figure out a way at the GitLab layer to translate JSON that I don't understand into protobuf that I don't understand. Which yeah.
I don't think you can, because for protobuf you always need a schema.
The schema. Well, you need the numbering. Just
yeah, I mean that is the bulk of what the schema does.
Yes. Unless everything is, the number is the index plus 1, something like that.
But it depends on the type of the fields as well. Like it's defining an actual packing of fields.
Yeah, so we would, if we stick with JSON on that end, we could come up with a stable API, like that's the name of the field, that's the index of the field, and transform it to. But that's basically protobuf then. We're rebuilding protobuf in JSON.
Rebuilding in a probably worse way at that point. I mean, at that point, you might as well pass the JSON through and just do a JSON decode at the end.
Yes. I'm going to add that as a note.
Yeah, I had another question. So if we're going to go with gRPC, what does that mean for the implementation of the AI gateway? The early discussions I saw around that were to kind of repurpose what we have for Model Gateway and extend that code base. Is that still the plan? And would we then do a gRPC server in Python? And is the language runtime and the gRPC support a concern to be considered there?
So there is gRPC support for Python, and I suspect that its support is better than the one for Ruby. But but it's something to look into. And for the first iteration of code suggestions, I don't think it matters because I think that's just going to stay REST. So we can make GitLab, the instance, just a proxy for what the IDE extension is already sending, and that stays the same. So the code suggestions service as it currently running at codesuggestions.gitlab.com stays working for a while we update the extension. So I don't think it changes anything in the short term. I'm also not super fixed on gRPC, so if we decide JSON is easier, then let's do JSON, whatever.
Well, I think maybe I missed what do we gain by using gRPC instead of JSON?
Easier versioning, easier bidirectional streaming if we wanted to for a lot of data.
I get the bidirectional streaming. I don't get why versioning is easier with protobuf versus JSON.
Because you've got the fixed thing, and you just keep adding fields, and you.
But I mean, okay, so you keep adding fields, and the payloads get larger, and if you want to change the semantic meaning of any field, then you have to kind of still go through like a deprecation process, and you'll continue to have that bloat. So especially with like early adoption stuff where we're going to, we have to assume that we're going to include things that we won't care about, in version 2, 3, 4, and whatnot. I guess I'm not seeing how that's a win. Like what we get over having fields that can be present or absent in JSON.
But the same goes for gRPC. Like it's not like they can be present or absent, and the clients ignore them. But yeah, like the receiver just ignores them, so that stays the same.
Yeah. So what's the differentiator? I guess I guess I'm not seeing why we're leaning into gRPC, apart from it being like a more compact protocol.
Nothing really. We need to add an API between two services that we run, and generally we pick gRPC for that. Like generally, a lot of the times at GitLab we've picked gRPC for that. So the first documentation I written was using JSON, and then people said, "Well, why not gRPC?" I said, "Okay."
Okay.
So I don't have strong feelings about it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks. I thought I might be missing some benefit.
I think one of the potential benefits is it manages by means of having a well-defined
schema.
It kind of solves the schema question. It doesn't solve it completely, because if you ever want to remove fields, you kind of have to define them as being optional. And so
that's something that I've written in the spec already. Make everything optional to start with, and if it's there, work with it. Don't.
Yeah. So you'll still need a whole bunch of runtime validation. In any case, it doesn't absolve you of that. But it, in addition to the
does
more
make it explicit
representation, it kind of gives you a built-in way of knowing which keys exist and kind of enforcing that those are correct. That's kind of the main thing.
And it makes explicit, like this field exists and it needs to continue to exist. And if somebody removes a field, then it's visible because you've removed it from the proto specification. Any additional thoughts?
It seems like we can satisfy the requirements with either standard, so I guess I don't have an opinion about it.
I'm not going to argue about the protocol, to be honest. If somebody prefers JSON, I'm very happy to do it that way.
I was mainly thinking of it in terms of if I was missing some benefit, and also the client support that we were talking about a few minutes ago.
Yeah, the client support is between GitLab and clients, no, because that always sits in between. Yeah. Alejandro, do you want to talk about the last
yeah.
thing?
Yeah, I added a quick thing. Maybe this is not too scalability, or I guess it is because we want to report metrics on it. But one thing that I was looking at on code suggestion is that we are not really, so now that we are using external models, one key thing that we have to handle all the time is the length of the input, which is not in characters, because for language models, you have to grab your string of characters and divide it into tokens. But the thing is that the tokenizer is different per each model, and we're using an external model, so we don't know what they're using. So, but the thing that we're doing right now is we're just saying, let's allow the user to only add up to 2048 characters. And if we look at the logs, we're hitting the limit. But then when we go to the Google documentation, you have a limit of that's bigger than that, and it is not in characters, but in token length. And so the problem that we're facing is that because this is a black box, we are not able to grab the string, tokenize it, and then send the tokens to the model, because the model only accepts the string, and then tokenizes internally. So one strategy we could use here, which we've been discussing, is just grab a random tokenizer. Here, for example, we've talked about using an OpenAI tokenizer, which is obviously not what Google is using, but just to get an estimate, because tokenizers are similar, just to get an estimate of what we do, of how many tokens are contained in the input string, and then we can do things. So, for example, Stan was working on something like, well, if we're sending under the Google's token limit, then we can include some more context, like the import statements at the top of the file, and that should give you better suggestions, because now there's context about what libraries are being used and that kind of stuff. I also needed to report metrics to Prometheus. I'm currently reporting character length, but that's not that useful because token is the real measure.
What does does the truncation happen now at the AI model gateway or at the VS Code?
At the gateway. So now we are actually, I don't know. I know this was what they were discussing here. They were saying, oh, it's 2048 pattern string characters, which depending on encoding, it translates to more or less bytes. Yeah, I don't remember at the moment. I think for sure I can say, I don't know if it's happening on the editor or on the gateway, but we are sending at most 2048 characters to Google. And we have a much larger capacity, which we're just not sure what capacity is. One thing that we have seen is that you can apparently send, we haven't hit the upper limit in Google. We tried sending like 10,000 characters, and Google didn't complain. It just apparently dismisses some of the earlier tokens that you send, and only processes the 8,000 latest tokens that you send. So I was also looking at, here it is. I was also looking at, maybe this is not the best, but there's also this tokenizer. It might be a better fit. I have very little to go by, except that Google publishes models that say that that are tokenized that way. But yeah, one of the things that I still don't wrap my mind around is that this is in any case very inefficient, because we're going to tokenize, but that's not going to influence in any way what the model does, because the model is just going to take the input stream. So it's kind of unnecessary, but that's the best way we have to measure things in our side now that we're using a model that we don't control.
Just for context, have we committed to using these externally generated models instead of our home built models?
We put out an official announcement that said that Google models are now first party models. I think there's a bit of experimentation and comparison going on, but the general direction is to head towards Google and brand that as more white label.
Okay, got it. And with regard to the tokenization, I kind of didn't follow at what point in the data flow does tokenization happen, and does the model consume the tokens, or does it actually do the tokenization itself?
So when we had our own model, and what we did was take the input string, and then before passing it to the model, there were like 3 steps. There was pre-processing, model, and post-processing. And the pre-processing, we took the string, changed it into tokens, and that was what the model processed.
That makes sense. That's kind of what I expected.
Yeah.
And is that different than what we're using with Google's models?
With Google, we just give them the string, and we don't know what they do internally.
Oh,
and they give us back a string.
Fascinating. Okay. And is it fair to? So I've worked a bit with tokenizers and lectures in the past. I'm kind of assuming, but not a lot. So I'm making a lot of assumptions, and I want you to tell me if I've got something wrong here. If we pass an input string that's, say, for example, the 2048 characters, would we expect there to potentially be more tokens than characters, depending on how they lex out, or would we expect that the character count to be an upper bound on token count?
Yes, yeah, definitely. There's never going to be a case where a character is divided into multiple tokens. Yeah.
Okay.
And if you look at actually that page that I was showing, it does say that for the models that we're using, a token is roughly equivalent to 4 characters. So a beginning heuristic would be to just divide your input string length by 4. But I think we can do better, maybe.
Okay, thanks. That's great stuff. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem. That's all I had.
Well, I've got a couple of flame graphs to share, but it's this is hot off the presses, so I'll just take a moment. This is a follow-up from last time, a much shorter follow-up versus last time. Oh my gosh, I have so many tabs. I'm sorry. No, I have time before I get to the right ones. Here we go. Okay. Screen share. Okay, so this is again from the memory bloat that we're seeing on dedicated. We at this point have two code paths that are associated with freeing this bulk memory. When we terminate a single individual socket, let me make this a little bit easier to read. When we kill an individual, so these are 2 code paths in the kernel for freeing socket buffers. So this one is when we assassinate a particular socket by injecting a TCP reset into the stream. The context here is we've got a long-lived TCP connection where the client has set its receive window to be 0 bytes, and therefore we're not allowed to send any data to it, but server is still spitting out data that it wants to send to the client. And so we accumulate an ever-growing backlog of data in this socket, which is why it accumulates a lot of memory usage. And when we kill that session, this is the specific code path that we get for releasing those socket buffers. So at the top, you can see it's kind of got the generic page freeing code, and kind of in the middle here, we can see that that when we use TCP kill is a small utility that just injects TCP resets into an existing socket, and it uses the send to syscall to do so. And we can see that the way that ends up kind of during that syscall actively freeing the socket buffer pages is it processes the we get to see that here. It processes this. It processes as a consuming the backlog of receive packet direction, and detecting the resets and purging the write queue, which is one of, this is related to but not identical to the transmit buffer. And so that's how we end up getting to free a bunch of this bulk memory. And this particular example was from a single socket that had over 100 megabytes of data accumulated in its backlog, which is way more than what the limit should have been. And then the more generic path is when we have a clean shutdown that uses a FIN exchange instead of a hard TCP reset. We end up with the socket buffers being released more gradually during regular IRQs, where a timer-based handler is doing the cleanup asynchronously in the background. So those are two hot off the press findings from this memory bloat analysis. We've been hunting for a while to find the exact allocation path and the exact free paths, and I was pretty confident that there were going to be at least two relevant cases for freeing pages, and we got both of them yesterday. So that was fresh info that I'd share. We're going to do like a kind of a summary write up on this soon, maybe today, maybe tomorrow. So there'll be some writing that kind of gives more context around it. But since we had a couple minutes, I thought I'd go ahead and give a sneak preview here.
Have you decided which of the solutions you found you're going to stick with?
Oh, actually,
short term?
Let's talk about that. So I would love to get your opinion on this, Bob. So as mitigations, we are gonna do the sysctl adjustment to stop using compound pages, because that greatly reduces but doesn't eliminate the bloat rate. Periodic restarts of Nginx is probably going to be the simplest thing to as a band-aid. And as a long-term strategy, we're thinking about having asking our GitLab development team to have WebSockets have an upper bound on how long it will patiently wait when it sends server pings to the client and the client isn't responding. Because the reason these sockets are staying held open for so long is because there's a TCP proxy layer, probably a firewall or other network security device, that's injecting TCP keep alive packets in the TCP stream, but it can't do that within the SSL, within the TLS tunnel. So which is how the WebSocket traffic gets carried. So if we at the WebSocket layer of the protocol stack require clients to respond, the machine in the middle isn't going to be able to spoof that, and so that would be a reliable way to detect whether or not the client really is there. And we can set that, if that's feasible, we could set that as a configurable timeout for with a really generous upper bound, as long as it's like not days, which is how long it takes to fill up memory. And this would help out, outside of the context of this weird case where we've got a misbehaving piece of network infrastructure between the client and us.
I'm just checking. I think Action Cable should allow us to set that.
Awesome.
And
Craig
then,
and I were kind of brainstorming yesterday, and that was kind of where we were leaning. We don't think it's going to be feasible to deal with this at the Nginx layer because because it's not it would anyway. I don't want to take up too much time. We're pretty confident that dealing with it at the Nginx layer is not going to be feasible for multiple reasons, but doing it within the WebSocket stream seems like it would be a significant win, and it does look like it's the WebSocket TCP connections that are responsible for the large majority of this memory leak, possibly all of it. Well, I guess that's it, guys.
yeah, sorry, I'm going to try to find the solution in the Rails thing and link it to you if you want to create an issue for.
That would be beautiful. Thanks.
Talk to you all later.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.